The recovery of Houston and the greater Houston area continues, and it is a testimony to the world what true Christian charity looks like and what freedom looks like. That and a lot more. I'm Randall Terry. This is Voice of Resistance. Our hearts continue to go out to people in Texas. One of our dearest friends' brother is in Houston and has completely lost his home. Him and his wife just finished remodeling the house. And, you know, I want to say this. I want to start with a dose of Christian reality, because this is a Christian network, and I make no bones about it. This is a Christian show. 2 nights ago, we had somebody in our church family, who was killed in a car wreck. A man married with 3 children, and his youngest is a senior in high school. And as you can imagine, everyone in the church is sick with grief. He was killed on the interstate, very sudden. And that our lives they just can slip through our fingers so fast. This life is so precious, and it's like the lilies of the field. Jesus talked about, look at the lilies of the field. They're there and then they're gone. God clothes them, they're beautiful, but man is like grass. Our lives are so precious, and yet, and in some ways, they're so fragile. It's just so fragile. And so my encouragement to myself, I go through these things, and I want to encourage you to assess your life so that you are ready to face your Maker. That's what I do with myself. And also to focus on and treasure the things that matter. I get worried, I get preoccupied, I get angry, I get worried about so many things. And, you know, maybe that person driving home was preoccupied about all these different things, and then suddenly a horrible accident, boom, and life is gone. So when we quarrel with our spouses, or when we're upset with our children, how important are some of the things that we really let vex us? And forgive me, that was off script, not off camera, but I think that part of what can make us the best people that we can be is that we focus on what matters, and then utilize our gifts and our attention for those things. What you feed grows stronger, what you starve grows weaker. And so let's feed the things in us that matter, and let's starve out the things that don't. So we're watching people in Houston. There has been a significant loss of life, but way less than a lot of people thought. Now, for every life that has been lost, there is a story, there is heartache, there is loss, and it's real. And we grieve for those who have left this life and for their surviving family members. But we want to thank God that the loss of life was way less than it could have been. And now the rebuilding begins. And we see what Christian charity looks like. There's organizations that are stepping forward, but also neighbor with neighbor. The Cajun Navy, people just driving down there, pulling their boat, and now there's going to be people driving down there to help tear down houses, to help rebuild houses, to help with food. There's stores that are giving away food in the Texas area, the community pulling together, and it's done out of a love thy neighbor as thyself motivation. And it's wonderful. And it's a wonder to the world. Now, there are other parts of the world that enjoy this as well, but when there's a natural disaster anywhere in the world, usually, not always, but usually the first one to step up with its resources is the United States of America. All right? And that's whether it's under a Democrat or a Republican, whether it's under Obama or Bush or Trump. That's because it's because of who we are. It's because our culture is informed by our Lord Jesus Christ and by love of neighbor. And even people who are not Christians, even people who are hostile to Christianity, will oftentimes still reach out and love their neighbor as themselves, because our culture, which is a Christian culture, teaches us and has informed us and has formed our consciences to do that. And as difficult as a situation like Houston is, it's always a delight to see people loving their neighbor as themselves. And the reward is in the service itself. I've got to take a break. I'll be right back. I want to read to you a little clip out of history that you'll find very interesting regarding President Grover Cleveland, and it had to do with relief in Texas. Don't go away. You're going to want to hear this. Today, many so-called Christian intellectuals believe that the God of evolution used billions of years of death and destruction to evolve the bodies of the first human beings. Then, they simply declare the theory of evolution as fact to justify their unproven scientific fallacies. By the grace of God, more and more Catholics are rejecting this modern-day mythology in favor of the traditional doctrine of creation, as recorded by the Bible and believed and taught by all the fathers and doctors of the church. To find out how sound theology and natural science confirm the sacred history of Genesis, visit the Colby Center for the Study of Creation, and be sure to check out our bookstore, which has titles like I Have Spoken to You from Heaven, A Catholic Defense of Creation in 6 Days, and A Catholic Assessment of Evolutionary Theory. That's the Colby Center for the Study of Creation. Welcome back to the program, friend. There was a time in American history, in the American experiment of self-government, where presidents took their oath of office regarding the limited powers of the federal government and the expenditure of public monies. They took it really seriously, okay? Now, we don't even pass budgets. I don't think a single budget was passed during President Obama's tenure. And obviously, it's too early in the Trump administration, but there's no budget. We're just doing continuing resolutions. Just spending, $20 million in $20 trillion in debt and rising. So it's out of control. It wasn't always that way. There was a time when this is what's here, this is what came in, and we're not going to run a deficit, and we're not going to spend money on the relief of private suffering. I want to read to you, I'll tell you the background. There was a drought in a certain part of Texas, and this is in the 1880s, if my memory is correct. Grover Cleveland was the president, and Congress sent a bill in front of him. He vetoed over 580 bills. Over 580 bills he vetoed. Only 7 times, according to one article that I read, did the Congress override his vetoes. So the Congress sends him a bill called the Texas Seed Bill to give $10,000 worth of seed to these farmers. Now, $10,000 today is nothing, and even back then, it was not a lot of money. You understand? I mean, even if it would be like $1 million worth of seed, it's still, when you think of the amount of acreage that requires seed, it wasn't a lot of money. He vetoed the bill. And listen to what he said. Put that quote up there for me, would you, Billy Bob? I can find no warrant for such an appropriation in the Constitution. And I do not believe that the power and the duty of the general government ought to be extended to the relief of individual suffering, which is in no manner properly related to the public service or benefit. By the way, that means everyone. In other words, a bridge is built with federal money or state money, and everyone can use the bridge. But individual suffering, we're not going to take public money, tax money, and build a bridge on a certain person's property because they have a creek that goes through it or a river and they can't get to all their property. All right, that's a hardship on this family, and we're not going to build a bridge for them. We're not going to give seed to these farmers. I continue with what he said. This is what he wrote after he vetoed the bill, because everyone was like, not everyone, some people were saying, well, you're a skinflint, you don't care. I care very much, but this is not why we have a federal government. He said, a prevalent tendency To disregard the limited mission of this power and duty should, I think, be steadily resisted, to the end that the lesson should be constantly enforced that, though the people support the government should not support the people. End quote. That is awesome. Though the people support the government, our tax money supports the government should not support the people. Because ultimately, it's the redistribution of wealth. It's Karl Marx, it's communism. The concept of redistributing wealth comes not from the U.S. government, not from our founding documents, not from the Constitution. It comes from the Communist Manifesto, that you take money from people and then you redistribute it. And he vetoed it. Oh, and he said one other thing. I got to read this because it's fun. He said, the friendliness and charity of our countrymen can always be relied on to relieve their fellow citizens in misfortune. Individual aid has to some extent already been extended to the sufferers mentioned in this bill. So in the light of what's happening in Texas right now, this is quite interesting. And if my memory is correct, because when I've been watching what's going on in Houston, I remembered this story about Grover Cleveland. I looked it up. My memory is that over $100,000 worth of seed was in fact sent to the Texas farmers who were in the middle of a drought because of just charity. I personally know someone whose farm was wiped out by a tornado. And a farmer in Texas took 10,000 bushels, gave 10,000 bushels of seed to this farmer so that he could replant, just as a gift. 10,000 bushels of seed. And the farmer recovered from the tornado and has gone on to be a successful farmer. It was a private act of kindness, not government redistribution of wealth. Grover Cleveland leaves us a great lesson, and I think we would be in a lot less debt as a nation if we followed his example. I'm going to take a break. I'll be right back talking about Atlas Shrugged. Wait a minute, I don't know anything about Atlas Shrugged. I'll still talk about something. Don't go away. Have Muslim terrorists hijacked the peaceful religion of Islam? Or is there more to the story? The answer lies in the life of one man, Mohammed, the founder of Islam. Muslim terrorists see themselves inside a 1,400-year-old story, a narrative that focuses on specific events in the life of Mohammed. We are going to look at Mohammed's life using their most sacred literature. We will look at Mohammed at the Battle of Badr. We'll see him deal with those who mock him. We'll see the times when he used deception. We'll witness Mohammed's anti-Semitism. And yes, we will discuss Mohammed and his teachings concerning sex, slavery, and jihad. Friend, if you want to understand Islamic terrorism, get this series today. Off camera, one of our team asked me about the book Atlas Shrugged, and I have never read the book. I know that it is an anti-communist manifesto of sorts, that it supports free markets, and I started commenting on another book called Our Enemy, the State, which was written in America, if my memory is correct, in the 1920s. Great book. That book I have read. And so the question came up. Well, let me backtrack. A couple of shows ago, I talked about the fact that you cannot trust someone whose ethical compass is shattered. You cannot trust their political leadership. If they believe in the murder of babies and they believe that marriage can be between two people of the same gender, you cannot trust them. Because in the end, they are in open defiance of the laws of God and the laws of nature as God made them. And they can't be trusted. So this person brought up the fact, well, Ayn Rand was probably an atheist and supported capitalism. And so I stepped back and said, all right, let's talk about this for a minute. First of all, I would have somebody operate on my brain who was an atheist. I know that there were people who've helped us in family situations with severe medical crises who were either in support of child killing or in support of homosexual marriage. So in that situation, that's not the same as public policy. If a brain surgeon, I'm going to put it to you like this, I'd rather have a really good pilot who's an atheist land the plane than a devout Christian who is a cruddy pilot try and land the plane. I don't want to die. So people's giftings and their ability to serve their fellow man inside the faith and outside the faith is not what the discussion is here. And these people, all people are made in the image of God. The issue has to do with public policy. And Ayn Rand, author of Atlas Shrugged, this is a celebrated author. She is touted in a lot of libertarian circles, if my memory is correct, and people who do not want a communist infrastructure, which I don't want. But one thing I pointed out was that when Our Enemy, the State was written and Atlas Shrugged was written, it was inconceivable that you would have child killing. Inconceivable that you would have homosexual marriage. In other words, society's public morals were still informed by and anchored in a Judeo-Christian view of the nature of man and the behavior of man. What was required, what was good. Even though in the end the atheist gets into the quandary of they can't define good, Ayn Rand, if pressed, or anyone for that matter, Friedrich Nietzsche, it goes both ways. The ability to define good and evil is lost once you depart from a God-centered view of good and evil, because somebody other than us has to define what is good or what is evil. Otherwise, we're just left to personal preference, the Supreme Court decision, a majority rules, the barrel of a gun. You know, you might think one thing is good and I think it's bad. Which of us is right? If there's no one other than us to arbitrate and to say, no, this is what is good, i.e., for example, our maker, then the ability to define good and evil is lost. But when Ayn Rand wrote that book, and when Our Enemy, the State was written, and other fine people in different points of history who wrote political treaties that were based, even if they didn't understand it, they were anchored in a Christian worldview. Those books, you can still benefit from their arguments. But at the end of the day, political theory and public policy, if it is going to be sound, must reflect, consciously or self-consciously, must reflect the law of Moses and the words of Jesus, whether it's self-conscious from the author or by accident. The public policy must reflect Judeo-Christian truth, or it's not law. It's anarchy. It's self-will. It's chaos. It might have order, but it's still ethical chaos. So I'm sorry to take you on that rabbit trail. I hope it was of benefit to you. Go ahead, read Atlas Shrugged. I need to do it. But at the end of the day, you can read the law of Moses, you can read the book of Exodus and the book of Leviticus, and you can read the book of Deuteronomy and come away with a lot more on economics, because it's all in there. It's genius and it's unimprovable. I'll be right back. What Would Mohammed Do? Islamic Terrorism Explained is the best movie series documentary ever produced on the life of Muhammad and Islam. How do I know? Because it's what critics are saying. John Moore, radio host and author, said, "I learned more from What Would Mohammed Do about Islam and Islamic terrorism than I've learned from everything I ever read and watched in my entire life." Best-selling author Dr. Bill Warner said, "What Would Mohammed Do is the best movie series, TV production on the life of Muhammad and Islamic terrorism that has ever been produced." Friends, this is what the experts are saying. No one has ever done what we've done. I encourage you to get 1, 2, 4 copies. Call 304-289-3700. That's 289-3700 or order it at the address or the website that you see on the screen. Friend, we have a series that will help you and those you love to have an impact on this country. It's called Insurrecta Nex. That's Latin for revolution against the killing of innocent people. This is the history, the philosophy, and the theology of social revolution in America. We look at the Stamp Act, the Boston Tea Party, the abolition of slavery, the abolition of child labor, women's voting rights, the civil rights movement. All of them have this in common: courage, sacrifice, dedication, and in-your-face tactics and rhetoric. That's one of the reasons that we've been losing the culture wars the last 40 years, is because the bad guys are using these tactics and we aren't. We will send you this 14-part TV series along with these manuals for students, a teacher's facilitator guide for only $40. Go to 304-289-3700, 304-289-3700. We're running out of time. This will be a short segment. But we were talking off camera about Friedrich Nietzsche's book, Beyond Good and Evil, which I read close to a quarter century ago. And one thing I find interesting is if you look at the great villains of history, Adolf Hitler, he was informed by Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay, you have Nietzsche, the philosopher, and then his disciple who executes the philosophy, Adolf Hitler. You've got Karl Marx, the philosopher, and then you have Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin who execute the philosophy. You've got Karl Marx, and then you've got Mao Zedong executing the philosophy and then creating his own little red book. You've got the laws of Islam and Sharia law, and then you see it executed with the oppression of Saudi Arabia. So you have the philosopher, and then you have the disciple who executes. And the great villains of history, the great evildoers of history in the political realm, they're the ones who execute what is a philosophy that is anti-Christian, anti-biblical law, anti-Christianity, anti-church. So if you want to see what the world looks like without Jesus and Moses, go to China, go to the Russian Revolution, go to Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, go to India. Go and see what Hindu philosophy looks like in public policy and in social mores. Go to India and see the horrific abuse and neglect of the poor and the needy. All right, speaking of the poor and needy, we're going to have a big fight. It's coming up. It might even have happened by the time this airs, about DACA, the dreamers, as President Obama called them, whether or not President Trump is going to reverse that policy. Speaker Ryan, who I have come to really disrespect, he is saying that President Trump should leave it alone. So I understand compassion for kids. I really do. And it's a difficult decision. But this is about public policy. So the question is, does public policy on this point, as anchored in Christian law, is it legitimate to have borders according to Christian law? Is it legitimate to have laws that govern society according to Christian law? And what do we do with those people who break the law? And hence my constant inner conflict. Jesus said, how you treat the least of these, you treat me. Most of these kids are coming over. They're baptized Catholics. Some of them are evangelical families, and they're here. Their parents came here illegally. What do we do? Well, you have to take, at least one argument has to be, you have to take it to the end of the matter. If we say to them, you can stay, and so can anyone else. If you can just sneak over the goal line illegally, we're going to let your kids stay. That's a heavy incentive. That's a very strong incentive to get people to come. So I don't know. I think that our immigration policy is messed up, and it's suicide on the installment plan. I really do. So I'm leaning towards supporting the president. I've got to go. Talk to you again soon.